how much do you weight the attractiveness of your partner, taking into account the fact that of hedonic adaptation, etc., like all of the nuances associated with having a preference for looks? How do you think about it, or how did you think about it, say, 10 years ago when you were doing this online dating type stuff?
Yeah, it's always not been that important to me. So that's like a nice answer. Now, I would say revealed preference-wise, a lot of my partners have been very attractive. Some have not, but a lot have. So I don't know. Maybe there's like some factor there that I'm not being honest enough with myself on. But I genuinely do think it's not the biggest factor. I think an interesting model to have is there are factors that fade and factors that don't, right? So if you're looking at something like looks, no matter how attractive someone is, that becomes a less significant part of the relationship once you're 10 years in, like, period. That's just everyone kind of agrees, knows that tends to be how it goes. I've always been very, very long-termist in my approach to everything, career, life, friends, that sort of thing. So I think when I think of something as more of like, oh yeah, this would be important in the short term, that's never been as big a factor for me. So when I'm thinking about characteristics that I'm looking for, it is, in the similar vein of what I was talking about, value alignment, connection, compatibility on kind of like work topics and talking about, things we care about, enjoying spending time with a person, these sort of characteristics. Looks has not played that big a factor in. But my friends would be like, oh, well, yeah, if looks have not played a big factor, why are the people you're dating, so attractive? But I think that's been somewhat like random chance and somewhat just like correlations. So like, maybe someone who's very conscientious puts some more time into their physical appearance than like an average person or something like this. But yeah, it's not in the top 10 of characteristics that I look for.
Wait, so what are you actually saying there? Are you saying that you personally just have a very low threshold for who you would be physically attracted to, or are you saying that you have a pretty standard threshold for who you'd be physically attracted to, but you just choose to not care so much about being physically attracted to someone who you're in a relationship with?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think A, it started off less important than most people for me, and then B, I thought like, that's not really a trait that I like about myself or value myself. Yeah. So I kind of explicitly said like, I don't want to care about this, and did start to care about it less. So okay. I think both have happened. I probably started off in an easier state than most, and then pushed it to be even less important as a characteristic.
How do you push it? Is it just like introspection and just kind of trying to internalize that I shouldn't care about this thing?
Yeah, so, I mean, have you ever heard about different techniques that people use for quitting smoking, where you, like, kind of, like, notice that, so that there's these techniques where you're kind of, like, doing value modification on yourself when it comes to smoking, and you're trying to, like, notice the bad parts of smoking. So when you're, addicted to smoking, you think about all the kind of good aspects, but if you really focus on, like, oh, this tastes awful or something, and, like, every time you do it, eventually it starts to, like, taste quite bad, and that becomes, like, the salient part of the experience. So I think some sort of, like, associative thinking and that sort of thing. So if I'm like, the sort of person I want to be, is not someone who's highly concerned with looks. I don't really like that. That's a character trait I'm not a fan of. And I think that's a silly character trait to care about anyways, because, it doesn't matter in the long term. There's hedonic adaptation type thing. These sort of aspects. I think, like, telling yourself that makes a difference. I think exposure makes a difference. So I think sometimes you think like, oh, I couldn't ever date someone with X, and then you date someone and you're like, actually, that was kind of fine. Like, it didn't really matter in practice. So some of that sort of aspect, and also I think really explicitly about the trade-offs. So say I don't care about looks at all. My dating pool is bigger. The characteristics that I can maximize on other dimensions, like value compatibility, is much higher. And to me, that's much more important. So in some ways, I don't even view it as like letting go of looks and not caring about it at all. I see it as like, oh, I'm totally not willing to trade off looks for kind of any of these other characteristics that I put in like higher regard.
But I think most people will kind of view looks as like a satisficing thing of their partner needs to be above some threshold of attractiveness. Are you basically saying that you have like reduced that threshold, through like deliberate practice or something? Or do you not see it as a satisfying thing? Do you see it as more of like a maximizing thing? Like if they're if you think they are very unattractive, then them being like, them having very aligned values can actually make up for the unattractiveness.
Yeah, so again, a bit of both. Okay. Like, if I think someone's personality is awesome, they do just like look more attractive to me, for sure. And I think that does happen to everybody. Yeah. But I also think that my like natural bar is like low enough that it's never been a problem. Okay, so low enough that there has never been someone who I like. This person would match my dating criteria, but they are missing this looks component. Nothing has happened there. So maybe there is like some lower threshold and I just like haven't bumped into a person that fits this, but it has not, I've never had to compromise on other things that I care about more, which is really the important question. Yeah. Like, again, if I could snap my fingers and the person's super attractive, like, sure, that's great. But I'm not willing to trade off, say like intellectual compatibility or something like this. Yep. Yeah. Another thing.
Sorry, yeah, go.
Sorry, I was just going to say, another nice thing about knowing your values and having unique values for anything is it makes it a lot easier to find what you're looking for. So if I'm looking for a house on the UK market and I care not at all about natural light, that's great. I can probably find a house that has really crappy natural light, but is very good on all the metrics that I do care about. If I'm looking for literally the same house as everybody else, so like, oh yeah, I'd like big natural light and new floors and this sort of thing, then it's a very difficult world to be in. And the same is true for the dating market. If you're a little bit weird, it's easier to find someone who's compatible because not everyone is looking for someone who's super into effective altruism like I am. But for me, that's a really important trait. So like, great, and that works better. So I actually think it's actually beneficial if you can find areas that you uniquely do care about or uniquely don't care about relative to just like the standard person, because then you can find people.
Yeah, market inefficiencies.
Yeah, it's like on the note of like changing our values / desires. There was a point last year, I think it was last year, 2 years ago, I mentioned on the podcast, where I had this exact thought process. I was like, okay, in this realm of dating, I currently care way too much about looks, and that caringness about looks is not warranted. Like, if I could take a pill and not care about looks, I would absolutely do that. And I was like, okay, what can I actually do in my life to make this not the case? And I realized that prior to this decision, I'd been following a load of like swimsuit models on Instagram. I was like, all right, cool, unfollow on all of these different accounts. Great, okay, that's one aspect of my life in which now that's like, I am not constantly reminded that, oh my god, there are these beautiful women out there. Any other suggestions on that front? Because like, if I could take a magic pill, like genuinely I would. I think I care way too much about looks, and this is like bad. But it's like that, yeah.
Yeah, so desire modification. So a few different things. One thing is you can find like replacements that get at that similar drive. So an interesting question is like, why do you care about looks? Is it because you really care about visual beauty and you should, surround your house with artwork? Or is it because it's kind of like a high status thing to like date someone who's really attractive and that makes you feel kind of good in that way?
Yeah, I think for me it's more like the status thing. It's more like I want my friends to think like, oh,
yeah. And that often is a thing.
So bad.
Wow.
But then the question is like, okay, well, now that I know that like this is connected to, I want my friends to think well of me, to think that I'm cool and can get a desirable partner. What if I talk to my friends about what I actually desire in a person? That changes things, right? So all my friends know that I'm not looking for a super attractive person. They know I'm looking for someone who's super hardcore in altruism and someone who's super intelligent and that sort of thing. So from a kind of like, Joey is good at maximizing his goals in finding romantic partners, they know that my goals are aberrant and different. Just like they would look at my house with no natural light and they wouldn't be like, oh, you got screwed. They'd be like, oh, yeah. You don't care about natural light. You found a good house, except, of course, I wouldn't rent it because natural light. So I think that sort of thing can be helpful. If you can, like, decouple these kind of, like, mixed up drives and think that, like, oh, yeah, that. The other thing that I would add here is people tend to think that people tend to way overweight this sort of thing in terms of how much other people care. So that's a good thing to realize too. Like, we are each the center of our own universes, right? So we think that like each of our actions are like really, really impactful, and like our friends totally remember this and think about this, and just like everyone else has like other things going on in their life, right? So I think, letting go of that a little bit. Your friends probably already think you're cool. They probably don't need like, you to have a supermodel to like continue to think you're cool. You've probably already won that battle to a large extent. So
I don't know. I think
that's maybe.
I think you're kind of on the fence right now. You need to score a few more points. But I think
yeah, right.
Yeah. You can double my subscriber count, and then I'll be fine.
Kudos for coming out and like admitting to that on the podcast. I think was that easy. I mean, I think. Yeah, you seem pretty happy with just kind of being pretty open about these things.
Yeah, mate. Like in a way, I mean, there's an element of like, honestly, I think so many other people think like this, and I do get a bit of a kick in sort of saying the thing out loud that I feel other people are thinking that they're not saying, and it adds to my thing of one of the things that I know that I value is like transparency and honesty and stuff in most things that I do, and so it ties into that.